Good morning and welcome everyone to the 30th meeting of the Culture, Tourism Europe and External Affairs Committee. We have received apologies this morning from Annabel Ewing MSP, Beatrice Wishart MSP and Dean Lockhart MSP. Our first item on the agenda this morning is evidence on the review of the Scottish Government's International Development Programme. And can I welcome to the meeting Jenny Gilruth, the Minister for Europe and International Development, Claire Tint-Irvine, the Deputy Director in the Scottish Government's International Division, and Estelle Jones, the Deputy Team Lead in International Development with the Scottish Government. Before we move to questions, can I invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement of no more than 3 minutes? Thank you.
Good morning, Convener, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to give evidence today on the Scottish Government's International Development Review. As you all know, COVID-19 has changed the world. It's why I'm not with you physically in a committee room today. But for the world's poorest, COVID has made a bad situation worse. Just this week, the United Nations reported that for the first time since the 1990s, extreme poverty is going to increase, life expectancy will fall, and the annual death toll from HIV, tuberculosis and malaria is set to double. And we fear a near doubling in the number of people facing starvation. But it's not the pandemic, rather it's the economic fallout that COVID has created, which is having the biggest impact on the people who live in the world's poorest countries. As I made clear from the outset, this review is not a strategic review of that initiated in 2016. Rather, this review is a refocus of our strategy necessitated by COVID-19. It's also been an opportunity to make sure what we do in Scotland is having the best impact in our partner countries. But it's also been an opportunity to listen to the needs of our partner countries, something I've greatly appreciated given the current travel restrictions. The review's offered a chance to consider the issue of white gaze in light of the Black Lives Matter movement within the international development sector. And on this, I was really heartened to hear the reflections of Peter Chapman MSP during our debate in October, who said in his contribution in the Chamber, the term white gaze was a new one on me, but I now know and understand what it means, and I agree that it is a powerful phrase. In the same way I was struck by Humza Yousaf's call for change in the Scottish justice system, I was equally affected by the viewpoint of one of our African academics at one of the round tables we held, who told me earlier this year, Black Lives Matter in America is not the same as in Africa, but if you come to my country and you put a white person in charge of a programme, when I could do that job, when I know my local community, that's what Black Lives Matter means to me. That's white privilege. These issues are being raised and discussed by the people who live in our partner countries. But there's also an ask of the Scottish sector in terms of what actions they will take to challenge that systemic racism. That's a duty that falls on government too. I say all this in full cognisance of my own privilege as a white minister in a majority white parliament, speaking this morning to an all-white committee about development, largely in Africa. We should all check our privilege. Now, I don't expect solutions to something as complex as this immediately or for that to change overnight, and nor do I have all the answers. But I do know we have a lot of work to do, and this review is a trigger point in starting that journey. One point I'd be really keen to hear from members on today is the balance of spend in Scotland at this moment in time. We spend more of our international development fund in Scotland than we do in Zambia. I question, as I hope you do, whether that is right and what more we can do to ensure our funding is targeted properly. Running a consultation of any form during a global pandemic has not been without its challenges. Technology can be unreliable, but for the most part, video calls have been a really invaluable way to speak directly to our partner countries and to our partners in Scotland about the review. We've also learned from the process, adapting the draft principles as we've progressed. For my part, I hope this dialogue with the sector continues, and I'm committed to doing so as Minister. Convener, I'm also pragmatic, so I want to offer our co-funded bodies, the Malawi-Scotland Partnership, the Scottish Fair Trade Forum, the Scotland-Malawi Partnership and the Alliance, an assurance that their funding envelope will not be reduced as a result of this review. That assurance stands for this Parliament, and it will, of course, be for any new Parliament to look afresh. Convener, I'm well aware of the huge contribution and the value of our core-funded bodies in terms of our unique Scottish offer. So long as I'm Minister, I would seek to continue to involve their expertise in our international development programme. I'm committed to working with our core-funded bodies and other organisations that we fund to realign their work in light of our principles and the thematic areas to better serve our partner countries. That's what this review is about, but it's also pragmatic to recognise the limitations of a truncated review, something which was highlighted by a number of members as a key theme in our debate back in October. Convener, this year marks 15 years since the Scottish Government's International Development Programme began its life, and the fund has grown now to include Pakistan, Zambia, Rwanda and of course Malawi, which was always there from the start, and the budget has grown equally and is now worth £10 million. That offer has always benefited from strong cross-party support. We heard that in the debate in October. I'm really keen to harness that support as we begin to conclude the review and progress accordingly. In closing, as I've also previously said to Parliament and will say again today, I'm keen that we embrace this wake-up call that COVID demands of all of us, and we make the right and the wise choices for the future of Scotland's international development programme, whilst maintaining always an approach that's in tune with our values, compassion, solidarity and internationalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Minister, and thank you for coming to speak to us today. If I can begin by turning to the submissions from stakeholders, which are quite critical of the government's approach to the consultation. You say in your letter to the committee, and also you've repeated it today, that you're undertaking the review in the context of Black Lives Matter and the importance of tackling white gaze, which is absolutely commendable. But I must say that I was quite struck by the fact that I thought that was the understanding of white gaze was well established in the international development community. And when I read the submissions from stakeholders, they confirmed that they were very much aware of that. And the SCIAF's contribution points out that our community-led approach that means that the projects we support are designed by the communities that we work with. So they work directly with NGOs in country, which ensures community ownership. They say projects are sustainable and create lasting change. So such an approach acknowledges, they say, the historic power imbalances of white privilege. And I think they felt that the Scottish Government was ignoring that, and they were a bit confused as to what they were supposed to change, given that they've been doing that for a long time. And that was also reflected in the submissions from some other international development partners.
Thank you, Convener. So to come back on those points, so the first issue you raised was with regard to the impetus for the review, and you're absolutely correct to say that Black Lives Matter movement has been a pivotal part in this process. The driver, though, I think, for change was COVID-19. Going back to the beginning of this process, the pandemic has meant that a lot of the projects we currently fund had to change their emphasis and their shift because of social distancing and the things that COVID has necessitated. The changes that we all experience here are happening in our partner countries. So a lot of what we were doing at the start was asking our programmes to refocus in light of COVID. But to come on to your substantive point with regard to white gaze, I have read all the submissions, and there are some criticisms of the way in which we've consulted, and I accept in part some of those. Naturally, some of those will arise through carrying out a review during a pandemic, which has not been without its challenges. But to come on to the substantive point with regard to white gaze, I take on board SCIAF's point that it's well understood by the sector, but there is still an ask of the international development community more broadly, and in the debate back in October, I referenced an article from the New Humanitarian which sets out some key tests for the sector, and one of those looks at how organisations that are based in developed countries like Scotland, for example, actually seek to challenge white gaze within their own organisations. So I think there's a huge ask of the sector in Scotland with regard to that ask. And in terms of how Black Lives Matter as a movement is experienced by our partner countries, one of the points that was made previously was, well, you can't take a movement which grew up on the streets in America and translate that into how our partner countries and how people who live in our partner countries experience racism. And that's true to say, but throughout the conversations I've had, Convener, with those who live in our partner countries and are meant to benefit ultimately from this funding, there have been examples brought to my attention of people citing when they feel that their voices have not been heard and potentially that race could have played a factor in that. So I don't think it's fair to say that it doesn't exist in the sector. And what I was really keen to do through this review was to listen to the views of those who live in our partner countries, to try and get their voices on the record, which can sometimes be pretty challenging, particularly when I can't travel at this moment in time. We've tried to do that as best we can via technology such as this we're experiencing today. I recognise the limitations of that, and that's why I think I've been quite pragmatic about where we can go with this review ultimately. But it's been a really useful process, and what I would say, and I referenced this in my opening remarks, is to me, this is part of the start of a journey. I want this conversation to continue with the sector. I'm really encouraged by what I've heard, but I don't accept that there's not an issue here in terms of race when we're talking about development in Africa. We've seen numerous academics publish articles on this. I think the sector largely accepts they have a role to play in this. And actually, from some of the conversations I've had with core bodies, they've been taking this issue really seriously and reflecting on what it means to them as a core-funded organisation and what more they could do to play a part in trying to tackle that systemic racism, which we know exists in Scotland and exists to varying degrees in our partner countries, so not in the same way that we experience it in Scotland.
Yeah, I don't think that I was saying for a minute that the issue of systemic racism doesn't exist at all in the whole international development sector, and I don't think that the submissions were saying that either. I think what they were saying is that there has been awareness of it before, like events in America. It's been a long-standing, issue in international development, and I think probably what Kiev was saying and what others have said is that the approach that they take, which is actually not doing work directly themselves but working with in-country NGOs, was initially an established way of trying to tackle that. But in terms of engagement with people in the partner countries, that's been another criticism of the review's approach, because you have said that you're engaging with governments, and obviously that's fine as far as it goes, but engaging with governments isn't always necessarily the way to understand what's going on and what the priorities are for the poorest regions of the partner countries. And one of the criticisms of some of the submissions was that the consultation didn't really include civic society. Now you have kind of referred to that in your opening remarks with regards to the pandemic, but there were quite a few criticisms of the round tables, for example, the way it was very difficult to include people and for people to have their say, and the fact that documents were provided in English only. And that seems to me to actually be exacerbating this white gaze approach that we're all trying to combat.
Yeah, I'll take that point, Camilla. So first of all, with regard to civil society, they were absolutely involved in the review from the outset. It was also my intention, and it remains my intention, to discuss the review with our partner countries' governments. I mentioned that in the debate in October. But in terms of civil society, they were engaged at the start from this within the consultation process. I think I would try to reflect upon some of the challenges we've had with regard to how you carry out a consultation during a pandemic. The first thing is that, some of our partner countries, in terms of their access to technology or Wi-Fi or even a laptop, it's not great. So we have to try to work with people to try and make sure they're available. It doesn't always happen overnight, and I recognise that the limits of doing this in a quick, truncated way in which I set out. There are clear reasons for doing that. The necessity, I think, that COVID brings means we have to try to act as quickly as possible. But, sometimes there were technical issues. The other thing I think to reflect upon is we're not dealing with people who are next door. There are geographical challenges as well. And I think in the main, it was done well. I do recognise, though, there was a criticism with regards to one of the submissions who mentioned our principles, for example, only being available in English only. I think that's a fair criticism. I wasn't actually aware of that until I read the submission ahead of today's committee. I'm disappointed to hear that. That's certainly something we will reflect upon and improve for next time. There were a couple of other criticisms I don't necessarily accept. One organisation had critiqued, for example, not having the academic round table. I'm not sure that's a fair critique from my perspective. But I think in general, the round tables were a really helpful way of getting that broader, and you mentioned civil society. Civil society has been a driving force throughout the review, and listening to their experience on the ground in our partner countries. And I really, from my perspective, take this back to the lived experience of the people who live in our partner countries and their experience of this fund, and actually their understanding of what these are targets or our themes rather for international development should be. And it was a fantastic, I felt as Minister certainly, opportunity to speak to them directly whilst we're not able to travel. So I don't know if my officials want to come in specifically on the points you raised with regard to civil society.
Hello, yes. So just to, we do actually have a list. So there were a number of civil society events held with civil society in our partner countries. So we have had roundtables with Malawian civil society members, with Rwandan and with Zambian. We've actually had 2 events with civil society members, and we don't have the exact figures of the attendance, but we can certainly get those to the committee. But the Malawian event particularly was very well attended. Both of the events were very well attended from a range of different representatives from across Malawian civil society.
I think that you do. I mean, the Scottish Malawi Partnership does acknowledge that you have admitted that the initial consultation wasn't great and that you changed your approach. That's what the submission in Scottish Malawi Partnership is.
So I've seen, Convener, I've seen that reference from the Scotland Malawi Partnership. I'm not necessarily sure we have changed our approach, but I don't know if Claire St Urban wants to come in on that point. I certainly reflected what I would say, Convener, on some of the points made by members during the debate back in October, and that focus on civil society. So potentially that's what they're referencing. But I'm not necessarily sure there's been a huge shift in our focus going back to the announcement back in September. But I'm not sure, Claire, if you want to say more on that point.
Yeah, certainly, Minister. I mean, I can say a bit more. I mean, when we were thinking about how we structured this process, we'd always planned to consult with civil society. In fact, it was fundamental to our approach. We'd started that process, however, with the Minister's appearance with the debate in Parliament, because we felt that the cross-party support for this approach has been so important that we felt that that was inappropriate to have that early in the process. You'll see from the website where we've listed the various events which the Minister has participated in with civil society that they mostly follow on from that debate. So I think this reflects, as the Minister has said, we only had a few months to run this, but we've absolutely had an intense period of engagement with civil society. We don't see that as a change in our approach. That was always our plan, but it certainly began from October. So if what SNP are seeing is that they didn't hear so much to start with, we wrote to them all as soon as the review was announced in Programme for Government to set out our plans. But the actual events, as you'll see from the website, have largely taken place in October and November.
Right. Just to go back on that, SCIAF say we urge the Scottish Government to seek written consultation from civil society in order to fully capture the experience and best practice that already exists. Are you going to be seeking written submissions from civil society in these countries?
Not at this moment in time, Convener. There was a very clear reason we didn't seek written consultation, because if we go into written consultation, that actually widens out the scope of this review. So going back to my original point in my opening comments, I referenced this being a refresh of our strategy. What we're fundamentally not aiming to do is to unpick our strategy at this moment in time. In 2016, we had a very full consultation, which I think, and officials will correct me if I'm wrong, took over 9 months in total in terms of gathering all the views. So this was a short refresh of our strategy. I have said, and I'll say again, I don't think it's necessarily the end point. I think we've certainly learned things from this process. I'm not sure how many other government consultations have been carried out during the pandemic, but I'm sure we're all learning from how we interact with each other as a result of COVID. But we fundamentally did not take written evidence due to the tight timescales attached to this. But also, I think it's important to listen to the views of our partner countries, and sometimes seeking written evidence in Scotland can actually be a barrier to their participation. So I think actually the roundtables to some extent allow for a wider range of views to be heard. But, you know, this wasn't a wide strategic review, this was a refresh, and that's why we chose not to seek written evidence at this time.
Right, okay. They also make the point, and you have, that, you know, roundtables often can't reach people who have technological barriers. But just my very last question was regarded to another point that struck me made by the Scottish-Malawi partnership about the partnership between Scottish organisations. And you mentioned the amount of money that was spent in Scotland. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember going on the Make Poverty History marches, and we had some involvement in the G8 summit that kind of kicked off some of the international development work in Scotland. My recollection was that the approach then, which has continued and developed, was to ensure that it really was a partnership, and that part of it was education within Scotland, and forming equal partnerships between Scottish organisations and Malawian organisations, so that you didn't actually get this kind of like, you know, the white gaze approach, to go back to that phrase, where we were kind of somehow giving something, that it was actually an equal partnership and that we had a lot to learn. And it seems to be a concern within the Malawi partnership that we could move away from that approach and become, in their phrase, a mini DFID, which they thought would be a step back, and actually, you know, move away from a lot of the really good and quite progressive way that Scotland's approached these matters.
Yeah, well, in reference to the Make Poverty History March, I remember it as well, convener. I was on it in 2005 myself. I'm not that young, so I was there too. But to go back to, I suppose, that unique partnership approach we have in Scotland, you're absolutely right to say that. And through this review, I'm absolutely committed to maintaining that partnership approach. I think it's a real strength of the Scottish offer that we've always had. So I hope that allays fears that you raised there. You also referenced education. We may come on to that in future questioning, but you know, my background as a modern studies teacher in terms of global citizenship, education is something I feel really passionately about. Now, the Scottish curriculum already teaches about some of the issues we deal with through our international offer in government. And actually, I think there's a natural linkage there. The point you made with regard to that feeling of actually we're partners, and this isn't about people having expertise, for example, in one country and having all the answers, was well made to me in discussion of the draft principles, which I'm sure we'll come on to, with our partner countries and civil society in Scotland, actually, who criticised one of the phraseology that we'd used around one of the principles, which talked of Scottish expertise. And we reflected on that and said, hang on a second, actually, it's not just about Scottish expertise. We don't have the answers to everything in Scotland. You're absolutely right to say this has got to be a partnership approach whereby we learn from each other and we share those examples. So I don't want to move away from having that partnership approach that we have in Scotland, because I think it's a real strength of our international development offer.
Okay, that's very encouraging. Thank you very much. I now move on to convener Claire Baker.
Thanks.
Thank you, convener. Good morning. The conveners covered a number of issues that were of concern to the committee. The way in which the consultation, there's two issues I'd like to raise. One is, I think there's a degree of confusion over what the review is about. And when your advisor started to speak, she started to say consultation, she changed that word to review. I think it's unclear, the government have called it a refresh, what the purpose of the review at the point is. And then the convener also raised the issue of written submissions. Because you went through a route of conversations, it makes it very difficult for Parliament or the committee to scrutinise how the decisions are being made. Whether there's a record of these conversations, some of which have taken place under Chatham House rules, as I've found out, that raises questions around transparency, and there's also been issues raised around the ability for everybody to participate. And as the convener says, we have evidence that in the partner countries there are concerns that there hasn't been sufficient participation, given a number of issues that you yourself have recognised.
So to come on to your first question with regard to the review. So this is a review of our International Development Fund. Some have described it, I have described it, and I've set this out today as a refresh, essentially. I recognise it's not a strategic, we're not seeking to unpick the good work that already exists in the sector, but rather to make sure it's fit for purpose. And I think we got to a place in the debate in October whereby Parliament recognised actually COVID does necessitate the need for change, but also there are global movements happening, and we've spoken already today about white gaze in the sector. There is an opportunity, I think, for the sector to refresh, to reflect on some of these challenges and decide whether or not it means they need to change some of their practices in light of those challenges. So in terms of the written submissions point that you came on to, which was also addressed by the convener, again, I would just say this was not a formal consultation. This was a refresh of our strategy. There are very good reasons we did not seek written evidence. Actually, one of the things that we spoke about in that question was about Chatham House rules, but we also need to take cognizance of the fact that if we're speaking to people in our partner countries who benefit in some way from international development funding in Scotland, they may not feel comfortable sharing their views in a space where they know everything is being written down and addressed, and that people may come back to them at a later point and push them on that issue. And actually, I found that sometimes we were able to have quite open and honest conversations with people because they felt as if this was a conversation. So for me, I take your point about transparency, but this is a refresh. This is about listening to the views of the people who live in some of the poorest countries in the world and making sure that what we do in Scotland is actually fit for purpose and is seeking wherever possible to improve their lives. And I think in terms of the points with regard to written submissions, we could have had a formal consultation. I'm sure my officials would have a view on that, but I wasn't around in 2016 when the last formal consultation was undertaken. Sometime there were a substantial number of written pieces of evidence that were submitted. We are not fundamentally seeking to unpick our strategy in Scotland at this moment in time. There are real strengths in the offer in Scotland. I think we all agree with that, and we certainly did in the debate. So it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What it is about doing is saying, hang on a second, COVID changes things. Let's look at what we currently offer. Is it fit for purpose? One of the things that we haven't yet referenced today, for example, is that actually before I was appointed in February, there were a number of smaller reviews that had already been undertaken, for example, on the Small Grants Programme, on the Fair Trade Forum, and on the Humanitarian Emergency Fund. So there were 3 reviews sitting there with actions to take. Now, as part of this refresh, I am also looking at those reviews, but the important point to make is this refresh didn't come from nowhere. There was already something sitting there to be actioned. I think COVID makes the need for change all the more immediate. I think there will be actions arising out of this refresh, but in answer to Claire Baker's point, I suppose I reflect and I understand the limitations of making real substantial change based on the fact that this has been a truncated review, but it's also been a review conducted largely via technology such as this. And I recognise the limitations of that. Claire Baker discussed rightly there, internet access and access to Wi-Fi or whether that be laptops or other equipment that can be hugely limiting. We know that in Scotland. So it exists in our partner countries too, and I accept that point.
Okay, thank you. So just to the question around the purpose of the review, the Scottish Government have said, though they've suggested the review is being held with a resulting refresh of our strategy in mind. What does that mean? You've mentioned outcomes will there be outcomes of the review, and what areas do you intend them to address? I think that's an issue that the sector feel they're not entirely clear on. And what does that mean? We'll have a refreshed strategy in mind. I don't understand.
So in answer to
what the mechanism will be for the review to then influence the strategy. Is that the intention?
It is my intention that we look at the evidence we have gathered through this review, and I will bring back to Parliament the findings from that process, and I will listen to the views of Parliament on it. I've set out in my opening statement, I'm pretty pragmatic about what we can do on the back of this review. For me, it was a conversation with the sector, but there are, I think, some changes that we will be able to make as a result of it. I've referenced, for example, the 3 mini reviews, if you like, that had already been conducted before my time, which was the Small Grants Review, the HEF Review and the Fair Trade Forum Review. So there are 3 reviews already sitting there with action point for them. But I don't want to prejudge where this refresh of what we're doing here takes us. So I'm not going to set out my stall here because the review is still ongoing, but it is my intention absolutely to bring that back to Parliament to get that cross-party support for whatever we do next, because I thought, and I continue to think, that there is strong cross-party support for our offer in Scotland. We heard that in the debate in October, so I don't want to prejudge that moment, if that makes sense to answer your point.
And the evidence we received from the Alliance, they have said that the draft, I think everybody agrees on the draft principles. There's been no criticism or disagreement around what has been set out in terms of that. But it's, what are the, but they're saying there's no problem areas or deficiencies that have been articulated that would help organisations and individuals in the sector envisage how their work can contribute to improvements the Scottish Government seeks to achieve through its review. And I think that's where the degree of confusion comes from, because the Minister has raised some really important points in relation to how she concerns she has about the way in which the sector operates. But I think the sector feel it's not really been articulated and identified what the areas are and the way in which they are carrying out their work. So there's broad discussion around areas of white privilege, but it's not been highlighted exactly where the problems are in the Scottish sector, the way in which they organise, that reflect that concern.
So to go back to your original point, sorry, have you finished?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. So to go back to your original point with regard to the principles, actually, whilst they were all accepted by the sector, they were draft principles, they remain draft principles, but we made a number of changes to the principles as we carried out the review. And I think one thing I would say to Claire Baker is, this can't just be about the sector in Scotland. We have to listen to the needs of our partner countries. And we heard this in the debate in October, and I will work with our core funded bodies, and I recognise their expertise in this. But it can't just be about their voices. It has to also be about the people we're trying to ultimately help in our partner countries. Otherwise, what's the point of an international development offer in Scotland, I would say. So with regard to the principles, there are a number of changes we made to them. I referenced, I think, in my response to the convener, the point about expertise, which is points here. I think it's number 7 potentially in the principles. We also look to add in a principle with regard to accountability and transparency. We also look to add in reference to the Sustainable Development Goals. So whilst I think Claire Baker is correct to say there's an understanding of white gaze and what Black Lives Matter mean in the sector, the principles as they stood might have been accepted, but they were also improved, I think, through conversations with the sector, but not just with the sector in Scotland. And I understand the point that you've made with regard to the Alliance's evidence. All I would say is everyone can learn to do things better. We're all, in terms of how we develop or deliver our international offer in Scotland, I don't think we should be standing still. I think COVID actually means we have to pause and reflect, and that's something we should all be part of. I don't think we should be saying we've got all the answers and we do this all really well anyway. Systemic racism, and you asked Claire Baker, for example, well, what should they be doing? Systemic racism isn't just about the international development sector. It cuts across all elements of government. We know it's a huge issue in Scotland. I have had some really useful discussions with our core funded bodies about the types of things they might be able to do themselves to try to lead the way on this issue. And actually, I think we have good understanding in the sector in Scotland about what racism and systemic racism means in their field. But you're right to say that, we're now looking at what practical steps they can take. Now, I don't want to prejudge where the refresh goes next, and I don't necessarily want to dictate to our core funded bodies. I think it's for them to come up with solutions, and already through some of these conversations I've had with our core funded bodies, they are coming up with solutions. They are looking at these issues seriously. So I think there's a learning journey to go on. Sorry to use a teaching phrase, but I think there is. And I don't necessarily accept that, well, we already look at this issue and therefore it's not for us. I'm not sure that I would agree with that. And looking at the draft principles through the process we've gone through, because we've had so many changes to them, I think actually they've strengthened what we're trying to do as a result of this refresh.
One final question. In the debate in October, I raised some concerns about the short timescale of the review. Is it still the intention for the review to conclude by the end of the year? And when it concludes, is that because you've suggested the review concludes, you then bring the outcome of the review to Parliament? Would that all happen this year? Is that then rolling into next year? And will the review produce, I'm not sure what the review is going to produce. Will it produce this is what we're going to do, or will it produce this is what we might do? What do you think? And what's the timescales? Is it still all meant to be concluded by the end of the year?
Well, I still have a number of events still to undertake as Minister as part of the refresh. Once we have undertaken those events, it would be my intention to pull all the evidence we have gathered together and to report back to Parliament on where I see and the government sees as the next steps. But I will work with Parliament on that. I will work with members on that. I recognise, I think Claire Baker is trying to get me to come to a place where I will say, this is what we're going to do. I'm not yet there. I'm still in, for example, I think conversations with the partner governments are hugely important. So we're still working through that part of the refresh. In terms of timescales, it's still my intention to bring the review to a close at the end of this year. I'm looking to officials with regard to whether or not yet we have a timescale for when we will come back with a statement to Parliament or with a debate to Parliament. I don't actually have a date at this moment in time to my mind, but officials, I don't know if you want to say anything more specific on the timescales we're looking to.
We are still exploring dates, but we're looking at I think January for some of the initial responses to the review. Can I also respond just to another point? I just want to give some of the figures of the attendance on the civil society events, because I think people were quite interested in that. So at the Malawi events, we had over 55 people, and it was the Malawi-Scotland Partnership who arranged that for us, which is one of our partners in one of our partner core-funded partner organisations in Malawi. So big thank you to them. For Zambia, we had 22 representatives from civil society, and in Rwanda, we had 17. We'd also like to make clear that with the technical barriers, we did also put requests down to all of our partner organisations. So that was to the Alliance of the Scottish Malawi Partnership, that they could actually put out requests to any of their members who felt that they might have any technical issues or wouldn't be able to attend, that they could submit written responses to be able to be read out at the roundtable. So we did sort of preempt, I guess, some of those technical challenges so that they would have the opportunity to feed in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next MSP is Ross Greer.
Thank you, Convener. Minister, I'd like to follow up some of the answers that you were given to the Convener around this issue of written submissions and how partners were able to respond to the consultation. You said that written submissions would broaden the scope of the review, but surely if anyone were to submit something in writing that went out with the scope that you have defined, you could simply disregard whatever they had submitted out with that scope and focus on what remained within it. And you said that written evidence from those in Scotland would create a barrier to partners from partner countries. Well, again, my immediate thought there was, surely if written evidence is specifically requested from those in our partner countries, that gets around that. I'm sure you've read Tearfund's submission to us, where they highlighted concerns, particularly around the cultural barriers, but also issues of individual personality that roundtable events can create, where people may feel that they're not in a setting where they can be as direct and as frank as they might be able to through written communication. Could you maybe respond directly to Tearfund's concern, but also address the points I've just raised about why written submissions were creating the barriers that you said they were?
So, in answer to your first point with regard to written submissions, I go back to my opening statement where I laid out this is not a fulsome strategic review, and officials will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the strategic review we undertook in 2016 took 9 months. So there's a necessity and a need through COVID to move quickly. I hope and I think we all accept that. In terms of written submissions, I take Ross Greer's point about you could focus it through, for example, the questions you asked, and if it was out with the scope, well, you could discount that evidence. But what I did not want to do through this review was to be faced with a deluge of evidence from Scottish organisations telling me this is what we do and nothing needs to change. Now, there's an issue for me here as Minister, and I highlighted it in my statement. We spend more in Scotland just now than we do in Zambia. I
think we may have lost the Minister.
Right, we don't seem to have the Minister. And she doesn't seem to be coming back. So I think we should suspend briefly. If we could suspend briefly until we get the Minister back. Good morning and welcome back to the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee. We had to suspend because of technical problems, but I'm very pleased to say that we can now continue with our meeting and we are reconnected to the Minister, Jenny Gilruth. It was Ross Greer MSP who was questioning the Minister. Ross, would you like to resume your questioning?
Yes, thanks, Convener. The Minister was partway through covering the question. I'm sure you don't want to repeat everything that you'd already said, but just to summarise again for anyone who's rejoining us, I was asking about what exactly the issues with written submissions were, and specifically the Minister could address Tier Fund's concern that the roundtable format created cultural barriers for some who would find a written submission or a different form of direct engagement an easier way to be honest and direct about their views.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Convener, and apologies for that. I think my camera, for some reason, is not working. But anyway, I'm back now. It's interesting we're talking about technology issues in our partner countries, but actually technology issues in Fife this morning. Nonetheless, to come on to the substantive point with regard to Ross Greer's question, on written submissions, as I set out, this was not a strategic review, this was a refresh. So if we had been undertaking a full strategic review, absolutely, we would have welcomed written submissions. But Claire Estelle can correct me on this. I think the formal consultation undertaken in 2016 took 9 months. So there was a real impetus, I think, for change. And actually, some of the changes we're seeking to bring through this refresh are not necessarily huge. I've kind of alluded to that in my opening statement. I recognise that the challenges of doing any substantial changes to what we already offer in Scotland in light of carrying out a review during a pandemic. Let's be honest about that. I think as well, Ross Greer highlighted partner countries and them. Well, I spoke previously about them potentially not being able to feed into a written consultation. There could be barriers to that. To come on to the substantive point with regard to cultural barriers, I actually found through our conversations with our partner countries and with the people who live in our partner countries, people were pretty frank with me. They were pretty upfront. Now, I recognise there might have been people in those meetings who didn't feel they could be upfront with me and they didn't feel that they could have that honest feedback. But, there are always going to be limitations through any form of consultation. There will be limitations to written evidence for people who would rather give oral evidence. There will be limitations to oral evidence for people who would rather give, video link or they would rather set out their stall in writing. There will always be a form of consultation which is not open to everyone. I recognise very much so that this consultation had its challenges because, not least of the pandemic, and because, we're very far away from our partner countries. I've not yet been able to travel to any of them to meet with the people who experience our International Development Fund on the ground. I think that's a hugely important part of the role, and I'm looking forward to doing it as and when we're able to do so.
I take your point, Minister, that any form of consultation has accessibility barriers. That's why a broad mix of consultation methods, even in a small exercise, is usually advisable. But just to move on to a question that you asked of the committee in your opening statement around balance of spend, and use the example that we spend more in Scotland than we do in Zambia, one of our primary partner countries. If the government gives money to an organisation like SCIAF, they're usually essentially handing it straight on to a local partner from their network in Zambia or somewhere else. So counting that as Scottish rather than Zambian spend wouldn't necessarily be accurate. The Scotland-Malawi partnership as well, they use a slightly different example, but they make the point that every pound spent by the government in Scotland on activities related to the Malawi partnership can leverage about £200 from Scottish civic society going directly towards partners in Malawi. So my question back is, how is the Scottish Government calculating spend, where spend is happening and where value is being generated? Because I think if we have clarity on that, perhaps the committee might be able to then feedback on our views on the balance of spend.
Yeah, well, I think that's quite a granular level question with regard to how we measure spend. So I will pass to my officials, if you don't mind, on that point.
So thank you. Yes, so the analysis that was undertaken on spend does take that into account. So the analysis of spend in Scotland is looking really at some of the sort of administration costs that that Scottish NGOs and civic society organisations would be taking to manage those projects. So the spend is either what is actually spent with regards to supporting the Scottish side of a intervention, and then the administration and any other associated costs with regards to running the Scottish side of those projects.
Right. So to take the SCIAF example, then the only part of, if you were to give money to SCIAF in one of these scenarios where they're then working with a partner from their network, the only part of that would then be counted as Scottish spend is whatever SCIAF spend on the administration of handing that over, essentially. Is that correct?
Yes.
Grant, thank you very much. The final question that I have is just following up on Claire Baker's line of questioning around what the government would regard as a success from this refresh exercise. So I'm wondering, Minister, if you could clarify how you are measuring success. What are the KPIs related specifically to this exercise? Obviously, the government's overall international development strategy has KPIs associated with various aspects of it. Specifically this exercise, how are you measuring whether this has been successful? We can't hear the Minister, I'm afraid.
We seem to have lost the Minister's sound. Minister? We still can't hear the Minister, I'm afraid. There's a suggestion that the headphones may be disconnected. Have we lost the Minister completely now? I do apologise for this. I apologise to our MSPs who are waiting patiently to question the Minister. I think we may have to suspend again if we cannot get the Minister back. Yes, I think we'll have to suspend again. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back again to the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee. We're having some technical problems this morning and we lost the Minister again temporarily. I'm pleased to say that we now have her back. We did have a little bit of time in hand today, but given some of the technical issues, I want to move on to the next questioner so that we can get all our MSPs the chance to question the Minister. So I'm going to move on to Oliver Mundell, MSP, and Ross Greer will bring you back at the end if there's time. Oliver.
Hi, thank you, Convener. And I just want to say myself, I think the Scotland-Malawi partnership has been one of the real successes of the devolution era. And as a Scot, I'm extremely proud of the work they do to build on the links that exist between Scotland and Malawi. And I'm slightly concerned by the kind of comments that you've made a couple of times round the balance of spend, because of course for an organisation like that establishes civil links here in Scotland with partner or equivalent organisations in Malawi, there's going to be a cost in doing that. There's an administrative cost in bringing those different groups together, and I very much see that as value for money. Do you share that view, or is this more about finding additional money to spend directly?
Well, to come back, and again, sorry, can I just apologise to the committee? I don't know what is going on with my connectivity this morning, but hopefully we're now back on track. So with regard to Oliver Mundell's point, with regard to the Scotland-Malawi partnership, I absolutely share your views in terms of the value of their work. I suppose that the point I made with regard to the core funded bodies, and I wanted to make clear through today's session, was that their funding envelope is not being removed as a part of this refresh or review. I think it's important I'm upfront about that, because if we're able then to have conversations about wider issues such as white gaze or what COVID means to their work, taking that discussion about funding off the table, I think actually is quite helpful to create more of a dialogue. Some of the responses I think maybe reflected a concern on funding, so I hope I've been able today to alleviate some of that. And in terms of the balance of spend, I don't know if this was caught by the audio or not, because I think I might have cut out in my response to Ross Greer. He did come back on this point though. I made the point that we spend more in Scotland than we do in Zambia. So I do think we need to look at that. And in terms of future spending commitments, obviously, that would be for a future Parliament to make that call. I'm not in that position to predict the future, so we all know what's happening in the next few months. But I think it's important to say that for this Parliament, the funding for those bodies is protected. And I very much share Oliver Mundell's view about the value of the Scotland-Malawi partnership's work. I mean, it's hugely important. There are strong historical reasons why it's important, but there are cultural reasons as well, which really link Scotland and Malawi. And I've referenced, I think, in my response to the convener, my time as a teacher. So I saw a lot of that work when I was teaching. It really brings to life in Scottish classrooms the importance of global citizenship education, for example, whether that be through modern studies or other subjects in the curriculum. So I very much welcome and recognise the points that Oliver Mundell has made today on that, and I hope that I have given some assurance to our core funded bodies that this refresh is not about their funding. It is about essentially reflecting on where COVID has taken us to, whilst taking cognizance of wider global movements, and I've referenced in particular the impact of Black Lives Matter. Now, that's a challenge for the whole international development sector. It's not just one we have to try and solve in Scotland, and I don't think it's going to be an easy one to try to solve. But I do think one of the things we've always been able to do in Scotland is to, in international development, lead the way to some extent through our partnership work. So I'd like to see us trying to champion some strong responses to Black Lives Matter, for example, in the sector in Scotland, in terms of what we can do, because I know this issue is being looked at by other countries all over the world. It's not just Scotland that's grappling with some of these wider issues in international development.
No, I appreciate that answer, and it's just I'm concerned that there's any suggestion at all that somehow spending money, helping and supporting these organisations promote international development here in Scotland, somehow money wasted or isn't good value, or isn't something we should be doing. And I think from your answer it's clear that's not what you're saying. I think it's just when it's coupled together with concerns that these organisations are somehow being described as vested interests, or in the review process, or that they feel that they feel that they've not been fully included as they expect. I think it just does create a concern. I know you've addressed some of those points.
Yeah. So I saw the reference to vested interest. I think it was in SNP's evidence. I mean, I am not aware of using that terminology myself with regard to the core-funded bodies. So, I recognise very much so that their expertise in this, and I don't for a second consider it to be wasted money. So I hope that answers your points there.
I know it does. That's. I'm quite happy to move on, convener, and let someone else in.
Okay, thank you, Oliver, and hopefully we'll have time for a few supplementaries at the end. Stuart Stevenson, MSP.
Thank you very much, convener. The Minister has made the point that we're looking at the arrangements triggered by COVID-19. So I want to just ask a few wee issues around that. And I suppose one of these interesting little things is, of course, that David Livingstone, so often associated with Zambia, was a physician. So that's an interesting little hoop. But in particular, I note that countries in Europe and North America, the wealthy world, has basically cornered almost all the orders for COVID-19 vaccines. Now, I'm not suggesting this lies in the Minister for Europe and International Development's portfolio of responsibilities, but I just wonder if there is a way in which we can respond to that, because people like myself, older in Scotland, getting the jab relatively early, to some extent is at the expense of that being available to people in African countries in particular. Is there anything that we sensibly can be contemplating doing to make sure that they don't lose out in getting immunity in their populations from a disease which is not simply a health epidemic, but has got a very substantial economic impact as well?
Thank you for the question, Stuart Stevenson. To come back on your point with regard to the vaccine, you're absolutely correct to say that it's hugely challenging, I think, for our partner countries in terms of access to the vaccine. It is important to say that the way the disease COVID has impacted on our partner countries is not the same way it's impacted on some of countries like Scotland, for example, and countries who are developed. So I do think that difference, it should be reflected, because we need to understand, why is it not affecting our partner countries in the same way? Now, I think part of the reason relates to testing and how, to what extent that's being undertaken. And actually, that was a key theme in one of my most recent roundtables. It was an issue raised with me by a member of civil society in our partner countries who said, testing wasn't happening, and it wasn't great when it was happening in terms of the quality. So that's something we will certainly take out of this. The other thing, of course, is in terms of the age and the demographics of our partner countries. There is some evidence to suggest that the reason it's not having such a detrimental effect in our partner countries yet is because, in general, they are younger in general in age than in comparison to countries such as Scotland and the UK. So, and we know that those in the older population are more likely, unfortunately, to feel the harsher effects of COVID-19. So there are those 2 points, I think, to take into consideration. But the issue with regard to the vaccine was well made. There is, of course, now a huge rush for countries in the global north to get access to the vaccine. We've seen it in Scotland this week with the rollout of the vaccine. And there is a huge challenge, I think, for our partner countries in terms of how they access it. With regard to what we've done in Scotland, you will remember at the announcement in the programme for government, the First Minister committed to this £2 million worth of funding, which would be ring-fenced specifically for COVID response in our partner countries. Now, I announced on Friday that fund would go to UNICEF, and it would be divided equally between our partner countries. And there are a number of projects it will focus on, not necessarily the vaccine itself, but on the health response to the pandemic. But it is certainly something that we have discussed in the international team in terms of how we might be able to do that. Obviously, the vaccine itself has only recently been approved. So throughout some of the conversations I was having as part of the review, I don't actually think that the vaccine had yet reached its development phase. So we weren't really having those types of conversations as yet. It was more in the kind of testing PPE sphere, and I can come on to give examples of what we've done on that in our partner countries if members would like. But I hope that gives Stuart Stevenson some reassurance that this issue is being looked at very much so. And as I think the point he makes about the rush for countries to get the vaccine in the West or in the global North, it was well made. We must not leave Africa behind, particularly our partner countries. We cannot afford to do it. And they've already had to deal with a number of different challenges in recent years, and this really is something that they could do without. So that's why I want to make the point that we were extremely disappointed the UK government chose last week to walk away from that 0.7% commitment of GNI to overseas development aid. That's not something we in Scotland support. We think it says something about our values as a country, and I would hope actually, I think we saw that most members on the committee would agree that walking away from that target was not the best thing to do, particularly not for the world's poorest in a global pandemic.
Thank you, Minister. My further, and I think, well, I note that in Africa there has been very significant technological innovation, which has been ahead of what we've done in the North, particularly in the area of financial transactions, person to person using mobile phones and things like that. And that's only one example of innovation. And I wonder if we're looking to learn from our partners in Africa, and through that learning, make sure that economic benefits that derive from innovations that they may come up with in their different environment actually are captured by local economies and local people. Because we shouldn't imagine that this is an unequal partnership if there are opportunities for equalising that partnership. And there may well be, because there are some brilliant technological innovators in some of the countries in Africa. I've only visited 4 of them, none of the ones that we have to work with. And I've had discussions with people that are really enlightening and exciting. Minister.
I think you make a very good point. I mean, I think with regard to learning from each other, that was highlighted through the consultation on the draft principles, and I referenced that, I think, in response to the convener. With regard to the issue, and I can't remember off the top of my head which number principle it is, but it's about expertise, and it's about how we share expertise. And I think our original wording seemed to imply we had expertise in Scotland that we could give to our partner countries. And what this has to be about is actually, as you say, recognising the expertise, exists in our partner countries. And some of the issues that COVID-19 has created, the challenges, are the same challenges we're facing in Scotland. One of the issues that has been brought up and raised with me on numerous occasions throughout these roundtables is the impact on women as a result of lockdown. So lockdown conditions making, for example, domestic abuse much more likely to happen. The same has happened in Scotland. We know that. So there is a learning opportunity there. And I'm really keen through this refresh that we try to build on that. And that, as you say, it's not just a one-way, we give aid, aren't we good scenario. It's very much that, partnership approach, which, as we know, and I think as was referenced by the convener, has always been a strength of our international development offer in Scotland.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much, Mr Stevenson. We now move on to Kenneth Gibson, MSP.
Thank you very much, convener, and good morning, Minister. Minister, every day at Holyrood the issue of mental health is to the fore. Yet when one looks at developing countries, the contrast between how people with mental health are treated is stark. Europe has 50 mental health workers for every 100,000 people. In Africa, less than 1 per 100,000 people. Indeed, Human Rights Watch found that in 60 countries, from Brazil through much of Africa to Indonesia, tens of thousands of people with mental health problems are simply chained up. As part of its international development programme, will the Scottish Government consider including the funding of mental health support and teaching of good practice in terms of aid provision?
So in terms of Kenny Gibson's question, I think it was very well put there. Just to, I suppose, give you a reassurance, I referenced to Stuart Stevenson there, domestic abuse. Mental health is correct to say is an issue we often hear about in the chamber, and it is, of course, affecting our partner countries. It's, mental health and poor mental health in particular has been, unfortunately, one of the things which has risen as a result of the pandemic in terms of the lockdown restrictions. But in the case of Malawi, the real lack of special support we have there and growing unemployment also contribute to poorer mental health outcomes. As I referenced in my opening speech, the economic impacts are really starting to play out in some of the most tragic ways, I think, particularly in Zambia's Ministry of Health. You know, the non-for-profit organisation Lifeline Childline are taking more calls related to financial insecurity. We know about Rwandans who've been trying to follow advice and guidance on protecting their mental health. But you know, I think with regards to the specific work we've undertaken in Zambia, we've been funding First Aid Africa, and our work with Police Scotland has been supporting people's mental health as well. First Aid Africa has developed a psychological first aid course to complement their physical first aid course by working in partnership with 6 of Zambia's leading mental health and wellbeing organisations, as well as taking on board WHO guidance. And they've also founded the Zambia Mental Health and Wellbeing Alliance to increase the impact of mental health first aid services during the pandemic. But I think to go back to the substantive point of Kenny Gibson's question, which was, is this something you're looking at and will you seek to fund it in the future? Well, to give him an assurance, yes, we are looking at it. There are so many different varying impacts of this virus, many of which we're still all learning about, and we will seek to support that work, because he's correct to say that mental health is an issue in Scotland, and of course it's an issue in our partner countries. So wherever we're able to provide that support, I'm committed that we look at that and we try to deliver on it.
Thanks very much for that. I'm very reassured by that, and I know that as part of your draft principles, the third one includes supporting advocacy for the poorest people and those in vulnerable situations, and clearly that includes people with mental health problems. Of course, the problem is that mental health problems in many parts of the world are considered to be the manifestation of evil spirits, and traditional healers may be called upon before mental health professionals, even if such professionals are available. So how can good practice be encouraged given cultural sensitivities? I mean, it goes back to the kind of issue you raised about white gaze. It's important that this kind of work is undertaken, but within the kind of context of the kind of traditional cultural sensitivities that may be encountered.
Yeah, I think there are sensitive ways in which it can be addressed. I mean, a challenge, I suppose, for us is that, you know, I'm not on the ground in our partner countries. We don't have staff on the ground in our partner countries, so we rely upon our partners to deliver on our projects, and they in turn report back to Scottish Government. But I think the point you make, Mr Gibson, is a good one. We've seen evidence as well about albinism in some of our partner countries, whereby people have been kidnapped. You know, there are issues around witchcraft and superstition as well, and these are all things that we need to look at sensitively. You know, another issue which it might not surprise the committee, I'm pretty concerned about actually, is the lives of LGBT communities in our partner countries. I think, and officials will correct me if I am wrong, that it's illegal to be LGBT in any of our partner countries. So there are you know, punishments that go with it. So for me, that's a huge challenge. How do you deal with a topic like that sensitively, whilst also saying, you know, we're here to help, but we recognise the cultural differences. But actually, you know, some of what's going on at the moment is a huge challenge, particularly, I think, for the people in the LGBT community who live in our partner countries. So I did want to make that point, because it is something I've addressed with our core bodies and with the sector through our, you know, our roundtable conversations. I don't necessarily have an answer to how you do it sensitively, but I think when you don't address it, to some extent you condone it. And for me as Minister, that's an issue. So there's got to be a middle ground in terms of how you address some of these issues. And on your point about mental health and funding, but also particularly on advocacy, that's certainly something we'll look at.
Thanks. I think the LGBT thing is a really important point. I know that the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has actually done quite a bit of work on that in some countries, particularly, for example, in Uganda, which is not one of the partner countries, but there's similar, in fact, much more reactionary views there than in the partner countries, is my understanding. So I think will the Minister be working with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in terms of you know, coordinating activities? And albinism, I think is really important. I mean, I've met representatives of the albino community in Malawi. laid down a couple of parliamentary motions over the years on that issue as well. So I'm just wondering what progress is being made in that area, and again, what work's been done with the Malawian government and Commonwealth Parliamentary Association on these issues, because Malawi, I think, is the area where the persecution of albinos is the most severe, or has been in recent years.
Yeah, it was certainly. I have seen a couple of submissions with regard to this topic, but with regard to specific conversations we've had with the Malawian government on it, not in my time in post, but I may pass to officials if they are aware of, the historical challenges on this.
Happy to come in on that, Minister. Yes, it's been a long-term topic. I think both the present and the previous government of Malawi would probably share many of our feelings on it, but it's undoubtedly an issue in communities where people with albinism may be targeted for the perceived value actually of their body parts in traditional medicine. The previous Malawi government had taken a very strong line on this that brought with its own challenges in terms of potential application of severe penalties. It's an issue that we continue to address. One of the previous members of the Scottish Government's Human Rights Defenders Fellowship actually was an albinism activist from within Malawi, and so we sought through that fellowship to build that relationship and build her capacity and ability to get some respite, firstly from the pressures of a campaigning situation in Malawi, but also to seek what support we could offer to her and her organisation and her community. So it's certainly an ongoing area of focus, and we will investigate the links with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association as well. Their work is very important and welcome, so we will pick up that conversation with them. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just sorry.
No.
Just to say, I think I said that it's illegal to be LGBT in all of our partner countries. Is not in Rwanda, so I just want to make that correction. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Just the final point I was really wanting to raise, Convener, the Minister touched on it in a response to Stuart Stevenson, is the impact of the UK government's reduction in international aid. Obviously, 99.9% almost of the international aid does come from UK, because it is really a reserved matter. And in 2019, we're talking about £15.174 billion. So if there's a reduction from 0.7 to 0.5% at a time when the UK economy itself is shrinking, we could be talking about a loss of £5 billion in a calendar year, or a financial year, I should say, in aid. So what impact is that likely to have in the partner countries where Scotland is focusing?
Thank Kenny Gibson for that question. I think with regard to the cut to the overseas I've made my views on this already very clear. In government, we absolutely deplore it in the Scottish Government, but I think it's saying something about Britain's standing in the world if, when during a pandemic, we turn our backs on the world's poorest. What that says about the United Kingdom as a country, it's certainly not something we want to be associated with in Scotland. And I recognise our international development offer in Scotland is far smaller in comparison. I absolutely understand that. It's largely a reserved budget. But I think there is a couple of points I'd like to make on the issue that Mr Gibson raises. First of all, the UK government have recently looked through the integrated review at international development. Now, they announced this review. We're also carrying out a refresh. They also, in September, announced the SEO-DFID merger without any consultation with the sector. So part of my aspiration, I suppose, as Minister was actually to say to the sector, let's have a consultation, let's have a conversation, because they weren't part of that merger. And then on the back of that, I decided, well, actually, largely our international offer in the UK is obviously reserved. Let's speak to the UK government, let's try and see where we can find some middle ground. I asked to meet with James Dudgeon, the Minister for Africa, and was refused a meeting to speak to him about the integrated review, but also to speak to him about our work on international development in Scotland. I think that's deeply regrettable. I would far rather work with the UK government on issues like international development, and I think we should. And I think when you have people like Tony Blair or David Cameron speaking out as they did against the cut to the overseas development budget, that shows you that this is not a political issue. This should be something we all agree on. So I hope that gives Mr Gibson some reassurance that whilst we deplore what the UK government have done, we will not move from our view in Scotland, and I know that he shares that opinion with regard to our spending on international development.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr Gibson. We do have a little bit of time in hand. I've just got a point that I wish to raise, but first of all, I would like to welcome the Minister's assurances that Scotland will not be following the UK in cutting the international development budget. That's very good news indeed. At the time of the submissions from partners about the review, it wasn't known what the plan was with regards to COVID-19 monies, and you wrote to the committee minister on the 30th of November, I think it was, to share with us that the £2 million, I think it is, is being given to UNICEF for work with regards to COVID. Now, given some of the issues that we've explored today about the importance of working with organisations on the ground, which is again what SCIAF do in partner countries, and programmes that are very, very close to communities. And given that UNICEF, for all the good work that it's done, has come under some criticisms as a kind of mega charity, if you look at the WELL organisation, it can be perceived as a little remote. It works with governments. It's quite opaque in understanding how its programmes actually work. Although, as I say, I'm sure it does do. We all know it does do a lot of good work, but it is a very large charity, and I just wondered what the thinking was in handing the £2 million over to UNICEF, and whether you did have any conversations with our partners here in Scotland, or indeed the people that they work with in the partner countries, to see if there was another way that the money could be used effectively.
Thank you, Convener. I hope the committee should all have a copy of the letter I think I wrote on Monday of this week regarding the announcement last Friday of the £2 million spend, which is specifically, as you say, focused on the COVID-19 response in our partner countries. I was really delighted to announce that funding through UNICEF. It's going to be used to meet the needs of our partner countries, including on the support of water, through sanitation and hygiene, on child protection, healthcare, immunisation, nutrition and education, and it will also be used to prepare the health systems in Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda for the distribution of the vaccine, which I think is an important point to make, and one which Stuart Stevenson referenced previously. So in terms of how we arrived at that, we do already have a pretty strong existing relationship with UNICEF, and they of course have extensive programmes already operational in our partner countries, working in those countries on the COVID response. Given we felt the immediacy of the pandemic, channeling the funding through one partner that can operate at scale in all three countries, we felt, and certainly I felt, is going to allow for maximum benefit in our partner countries. And I suppose I take on board your point with regard to UNICEF being a large organisation. You also, and my I suppose response to that would be that what we're doing through funding through UNICEF is also acknowledging the importance of multilateralism and multilateral relationships. So we recognise the importance of UNICEF in doing that. I think your question about whether partners were involved in this, well, partners obviously fed into the discussions we've been having as part of the refresh. Ultimately, it wasn't for them to make the decision. It was for me to arrive at that decision, and certainly I felt, based on the evidence, that UNICEF were the best place in our three partner countries to get into the country's systems and to deliver in a timely fashion on what we were asking them to do. And I'm not sure if Claire and Estelle want to say any more on that point.
Claire.
I mean, just to emphasise what the Minister said, we did ask both our partner countries and indeed in the civil society roundtables in countries where they saw the greatest needs were around COVID. And the responses we got back were around WASH, were around sanitation, were around the impact on education. So we had that in mind when we were looking at what we could do with this money. We have also given money where partner projects, existing projects, have identified activity that they could do that would meet that need. So, for example, to support PPE, we've sent oxygen machines to Malawi. So this is not the only thing we've done, but for the single donation of this size, and with the wish to have a systemic impact if we could in all three partner countries, UNICEF offered that route in. And indeed, they're working with the host governments in those partner countries on those programmes. So that was the thinking behind the decision on this occasion.
Thank you very much. We have a supplementary from Claire Baker, MSP.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose related to that last question, the Alliance submission to the committee did highlight the way in which the international development budget from Sweden and Irish aid has been distributed, suggesting that they went for a route of increased flexibility and it seemed to be more responsive. They suggest the Scottish Government should take a similar approach. They talk as adaptive programming. I'm just wondering how, during this period, the Scottish Government, have they taken that type of approach? And I mean, I think Claire talked about equipment that's been sent to the partner countries, but how have we? Because I'm a bit concerned that the 2 million pot has just been given to UNICEF. The review is based around the need to make changes due to COVID, but what have we done in the shorter term? Have we taken this more responsive and adaptive approach?
Thank Claire Baker for that question. I think it's hugely important that we were able to respond quite quickly. So I think Claire, my official there gave an example of where we did that. So in Malawi, for example, this is in addition, by the way, to the £2 million spend, and this was carried out before earlier in the year. So Malden, we had awarded an award through the University of Glasgow and Malden in Malawi, which was focused on giving digital devices, i.e. laptops or computers, to allow people to learn remotely. We also awarded money to Mal Scott to purchase PPE for the safe delivery of cervical cancer screening. We also awarded money to St John's, Scotland, but this was to support work in Malawi, which was on PPE. We also awarded funding in Rwanda, increase phone and internet access, that was via the Christian Blind Mission, also to Tear Fund, and that was in terms of the installation of hand washing stations. In Zambia, we awarded money to Christian Aid, which was focused on COVID-19 mitigation measures, so PPE, hand washing, and also to First Aid Africa, which looked at supplying PPE and oxygen for the distribution through the Ministry of Health. So I hope those examples give Claire Baker, I guess, a flavour of some of the additional things we were doing. And we were doing, I think her point about being flexible in how we spend money was really well made. I think back in March we had to stop and pause and actually look at what we delivered, and officials went out to all of our partners and said, are you still able to deliver? And some came back with changes, and Claire or Estelle may want to come in on that point and adapt to their programmes accordingly in light of COVID. Some came back with apps for PPE, for example, and some were not able to continue because of social distancing. So very much at the heart of this, we were able to respond, I think, quite rapidly at the start of the outbreak of the pandemic. And I hope that gives us some assurance that this work was happening at the start of the pandemic, and that this additional spend through UNICEF isn't just coming out of nowhere. There has been a pattern of us listening and responding quite quickly at the start. You know, could we do things better in the future? Undoubtedly, I think we probably will. We'll all learn from this pandemic ultimately, but some of that work was already happening. And on those specific projects I've referenced, I appreciate I just kind of fired through them, but I'm happy to share details of the spend, where it went, who it came from with the committee. I don't know if Estelle or Claire wanted to come in on the specific changes that some of our projects made.
So yes, happy to provide some additional information. So when in April, obviously when this really came to a head, we did a rapid risk assessment across all of our projects, where we consulted directly with the Scottish partner and with the in-country partner to look at the immediate and then short and medium term risks. And then we worked with those partners to keep all of the projects that we had running on course if we possibly can, because obviously whilst COVID was having that immediate effect, we had still committed money to other very important projects. So we were very keen to try and keep those on track if we possibly could. So with that, with the sort of short-term impacts, we then worked with each of the projects to understand what they would need to continue, or what they needed to pivot, or approaches that they needed to change. And then we also looked at sort of taking that adaptive approach to then think about how we could support them so that they could respond with the addition of COVID. And then with the projects that were really unable to continue, that was where we worked on sort of contingency plans on whether we would pause or whether we would extend so that then we could take that money and use that either to support other projects or to contribute to the COVID pot that the Minister has announced with regards to UNICEF.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just finally, before we go very quickly, Minister, we have talked a lot about sub-Saharan Africa, and I know that Pakistan is a partner country, and our focus, as I understand it, has been in the education of women and girls. What kind of feedback have you had on our activities in Pakistan, and are you planning any change there?
Thank you, Convener. You're right to say our offer in Pakistan on international development is somewhat limited in comparison to the other 3 African partner countries. It's focused on a scholarship programme through girls' scholarships, and I had a fantastic Zoom call, I want to say it was 2 weeks ago now, with the British Council in Pakistan to hear from some of the graduates of that programme. It's a really worthwhile programme. I wouldn't want to say at this stage what I will or will not change about anything through the refresh, because I don't think that's fair. I want to bring that forward to Parliament to have that wider discussion, but I certainly think it's a really valuable programme. The offer in Pakistan, as I say, is slightly different because some of our work with Pakistan, it doesn't just sit with me. So we have a trade offer which sits with Mr McKee. There are other strands to it. So it is different, you're right to say, but I very much recognise the strength of that offer at this moment in time. And it was a great experience for me to hear directly from some of the women who've been through the scholarship programme in terms of the opportunities that it has given them through this funding. So I think it's certainly a very valuable scheme.
Thank you very much, and that does indeed sound very valuable. It's good to hear about that going so well. And that concludes our evidence session today. Can I take the opportunity to thank the Minister and the officials for attending today, and the committee will now consider the evidence held in private shortly. That concludes this morning's meeting and allow a couple of minutes for members to have a comfort break and move to Microsoft Teams before we resume in private session. Thank you very much again. I now close the session.